Welcome back to our first round recap of Down to the Wire. Again with my NHL analyst Nolan Thode. Nolan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's been about a week since the Oilers are out of the playoffs, so the stress is less there. But it kind of turns to you guys tonight. The Habs have a big Game 7 coming up tonight against Toronto. I think most of the hockey world and even some of the sports world, I've been seeing a little bit of attention drawn to it. Elsewhere other than just Canadian markets. But it's going to be a great game tonight, and I think everyone's looking forward to it.
Well, getting right into it, we'll start with your Edmonton Oilers going up against the Winnipeg Jets in the first round. And, it was one of the more closest sweeps in recent memory. When we think of a sweep, generally speaking, we think of one side completely dominating the other team. We don't generally, we don't see these 2-1 hockey games that could go either way. The goalies both played amazing. It really could have been an easy 4-0 sweep for Edmonton if you think about it. And it seemed as though that Edmonton didn't get the secondary scoring that they were used to getting in the season, especially down the stretch. And credit to the Jets defense. They really kept McDavid and Draisaitl in check, really playing them hard and tough defensively. McDavid and Draisaitl only really exploded for a game 3, I believe. I didn't really. So let's talk about the triple overtime game 4 right there. I didn't really agree with Tippett's coaching in overtime, especially when you're benching, basically 2 lines. You're rolling 4D and you're benching Ethan Bear, who is, supposed to be a part of your young blue line, in defense for the future. So you might want to get him used to overtime in the playoffs, because when you have the best player in the world, you're expected to make the playoffs every season. And gotta give credit to, Darnell Nurse playing 62 minutes and 7 seconds, a complete workhorse there. But, it confuses me, because next thing you know, Ethan Bear, he made a wrong line change, which led to the Kyle Connor game series winning goal in triple overtime. And we got to speak about what he faced, and with the racist comments, like, that's when a fan base has gone too far. Like, his girlfriend said on Facebook that criticism is warranted, and I like that. That's perfectly fine. Criticism is warranted. You can say, like, oh, at Ethan Bear, you suck or whatever like that. That's fine. But when you then go the next step and you make racist remarks, that's when it gets too far. And, the Oilers had the momentum in game 3, right? They were up 4-1, and then they just collapsed in the third period when Josh Archibald tried to get back at Logan Stanley. So it's actually funny, because with the Stanley Cup playoffs, there are these mini battles that happen during the game, these mini one-on-one battles. And if you see during that Archibald penalty shift, Logan Stanley hit Archibald, right? They're on the boards, where the puck had just exited the zone, and Archibald took exception to that. Essentially, he didn't like the way how Stanley hit him. So then Archibald goes across the ice and basically tries to hip check, but clips Logan Stanley, which caused Edmonton to lose. Like, that was the turning point in the game. And then Matthew Perreault scores on the power play. Josh Morrissey ties it up from the point, and then Nick Ehlers off that face-off play. And that brings to my attention that face-off play by Winnipeg, because Winnipeg was good at the face-off dot, but they kept doing that same play, and it seemed as though Edmonton, couldn't really defend against it. They had in that triple overtime game, they had a couple of those plays, and that's really how Edmonton lost in game 3. And then finally, to close up my perspective of this, is Winnipeg, I think we're starting to realize that they were one of the more underappreciated teams in the North Division, just because of their defense core.
No, I fully agree. And I think, for the majority of the season, the Jets were kind of, up there with the Oilers and the Leafs in that, top, sort of tier of the North Division. And then they, had a rough ending to the season. I feel like it left a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths. And, they weren't expecting much from this team heading into the postseason. But, to my surprise as well, my prediction had the Oilers in 6, and whether it be biased just because I'm an Oilers fan, I want to see it. I truly believe that, the Oilers were going to figure out, a way to beat Winnipeg. They were 7-2 against them in the regular season. They had their number, all regular season. But, in that game 1, we just, Puyarvi scored the opening goal, and after that, we just couldn't get anything past Hellebuck. And huge credit to him. He was the best player for the Jets, this entire series. And I believe, when you're playing against a team like the Oilers, when they need to score goals to win, just a really good goalie performance can, turn things down really quickly. I fully agree with your point about, it being such a close sweep. The first game was 2-1 up until the last couple minutes. The Jets had 2 empty netters, and then 3 straight overtime games after that. It was just, really heartbreaking, and, never really got a taste of that victory in the postseason. And as an Oilers fan, there wasn't much to celebrate about. And, we're just kind of short-term memory and looking forward to next season, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's so weird. And especially it obviously happens during a pandemic year where we can't go see the games. Like, I can't even imagine the Bell MTS place and what the reaction would have been, clinching the series winning goal in triple overtime. And then, Nikolai Ehlers finishing the game. Like that place would have erupted.
Yeah, exactly. That's a moment. It's a great sports moment, but you think back, when the 4-1 lead is blown, you always have to think about 2013. And, such a part of that was, inside TD Garden, the Bruins fans, they were such a part of that comeback, the ones that actually chose to stay in their seats and watch the rest of the game. It was just electric. And, with Winnipeg, I'm sure it would have been, as good or even not, even better, just because it's such an incredible atmosphere when that, arena is packed in the playoffs. And that's something that the Jets, even though they didn't have the whiteout crowd, they were able to, figure it out.
Did you see the Bud Light seltzer can dancing?
Yeah, no, yeah. I saw him sitting in the crowd, throughout the series. And yeah, I saw a little dance at the end. It was a little bit of salt in the wounds for me, I guess.
Let's move on to the East Division. We'll get to the final North Division series next week. Obviously, Game 7 is tonight when we are recording this. But moving on to the East Division now. Talking about the Boston Bruins and the Washington Capitals. The Bruins beat the Capitals in 5 games, 4-1. Just my thoughts. Well, Washington couldn't get proper goaltending. Vitek Vanacek injury basically happened at the wrong time. It forced Craig Anderson to come in and play. And he played really well in relief. And personally, I thought performance would merit him another appearance, but unfortunately it wasn't, that didn't go through. The perfection line for Boston was unstoppable. They're currently making another impact in the, so far in the Islanders and Boston series early on. Alex Ovechkin is now becoming a free agent, ending a 13-year contract. And there is a couple of post-game there were locker room cleanup type pressers, and the reporter said that Alex was playing hurt and he had a back problem in the postseason. Oshie has said that he has thought of being exposed to Seattle in the expansion draft. He doesn't want that to happen because he said that he didn't sign an 8-year deal to get traded, but he does want to retire as a Washington Capital. John Carlson during the series blocked a shot with his knee and was playing injured. So just it goes to show you how these hockey players are warriors. And, the playoffs, it goes, you have to go the extra length to stay in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Ovi was dealing with the injury at the end of the regular season, kept him out of my fantasy playoffs. So obviously tough. And he comes back in and it seemed like he didn't miss a beat, even though he was playing hurt. He was able to still bring that energy that you expect from him in any scenario, whether it be a regular season or postseason game. I think, with this series, like you mentioned with the Archibald hit, I think that was a real turning point in that Game 3. But, the turning point in this Bruins series, I think, the Bruins were down late in Game 2. They were about to go down 2-0 in the series, and Taylor Hall scores to tie the game, and they end up winning in overtime. I think, without that goal, it's a completely different series. From that point on, it seemed like, the Bruins were just controlling play and they were able to get the best of the Capitals, and, they ran 4 straight games on them.
It shocked me, honestly, to see the Capitals bow out so early. Like, I thought this series was going to go 6, maybe even the distance to 7. I didn't think either of these teams would finish in 5 games.
Yeah, especially after the first 3 games went to overtime. It was just such a close series. And, people thought that it was probably going to go the distance just because it seemed like it was going to be back and forth, the teams exchanging wins. But, the Bruins were able to win that crucial game 4 going up 3-1. And, from that, once the Capitals got in that position, there wasn't much that they could do.
Moving on to the New York Islanders and Pittsburgh Penguins series, the Islanders beat the Pens 4-2 in 6 games. The Beauvillier, Bailey, and Nelson line played lights out in Game 6. They were really controlling play and, shredded up whoever the Penguins tried to match with them. Sorokin played great throughout the series. He was really, I thought, a huge piece in why the Islanders won. And, it seemed like the Islanders kept, being in the game. They kept hanging in there and being a pest to the Penguins. And, if we look over the history, the Isles have been the Pens the last 2 times they've played in the playoffs. So, there's kind of history on the side of the Long Island, with Kyle Palmieri, he was a great trade deadline acquisition. He scored the Game 1 winner in overtime, I believe, and then he had another huge goal in Game 6. So, those trade deadline acquisitions by Lou Lamoriello are paying off. Jeff Carter for the Penguins, he played a great third-line center role behind Crosby and Malkin. And I thought he wasn't going to provide much in scoring, but he asserted himself as a scoring threat to me. He had 3 goals this series and, basically was a constant threat every time he was on the ice. So I think that move really paid off for Hextall and Burke, despite them losing in the first round. And here's a fun stat that I found is Barry Trotz has not lost a playoff series since 2010. He has won 2 series in Nashville, 4 in Washington, and now 3 on Long Island. That's 7 straight seasons since 2015 as well. So Barry Trotz, again, going to the Hall of Fame in my books. It's such a successful coach.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, after this series, most fans kind of are know what the Islanders bring to the table, but even the casual fans, I think it's time to accept that the Islanders are a much better team than people give them credit for. I think, if you look at a team that, they don't have a ton of star power, obviously they have solid players, but no one that, completely jumps off at the page, calling out superstar status. I'd say Barzell's, their most talented player. But, they just roll 4 complete lines, 3 complete D pairs, and, they have 2 goalies who can get it done. Like you mentioned, Sorokin, he was great in this series. And I was kind of surprised just because Varlamov was, sort of their guy all season, Vezina consideration, at least. He was playing really well and he tweaked something. So Sorokin had to get the Game 1 start. He played well in that. And then I think Varlamov got Game 2. And he played poorly. They were down 2-1 a series. And then, Sorokin took the net back and didn't look back. He was just incredible. And, he was able to keep the Islanders in it. He was able to make the saves when he needed to. And then the team was able to go out and, string off a couple of goals on Tristan Jarry in only a matter of minutes. It was a really entertaining series for me. And like you mentioned, this Islanders team, Barry Trotz, winning series, but who would have thought that 3 years after losing John Tavares in free agency that they'd have 4 playoff series wins to their name? They beat Pittsburgh twice, and then they beat the Capitals last year, and they beat the Flyers last year. So those are 3 really good teams as well. The Penguins, Capitals, and Flyers. This Islanders team, they're a real threat, and I think they're gonna have a really good series against Boston. I think either team is really capable of winning that series, but the Islanders impressed me in the series, and they have the tools to make a deep run if they want to.
And I think if we were to really put the blame for the Pens, it really has to come down to Tristan Jarry. He just didn't play up to playoff caliber goaltending. We look in Game 5 when he literally gave Josh Bailey the game-winning goal. He sauced the puck right onto his tape, and next thing you know, the biscuit's in the back of the net, and the Pens needed that goaltending because they needed to steal some games, and Jarry just wasn't capable of doing that.
Exactly. When you play against the New York Islanders, it's tough enough to score goals. There's a feisty team that's not going to be able to give you much. So you need your goalie to be able to match them as much as you can, and he just wasn't able to. And, it was a close 6 games, but, in that Game 6, it was kind of just like, the icing on top of the cake for the Islanders. They kind of just – they were down in Game 6, and then they kind of just came into it, regrouped and ran away with it. Brock Nelson having 2 goals in that game, and it was just a great atmosphere in the Coliseum. I'm really excited to see the Islanders playing in that arena, and next year when they get their brand new arena, it's going to be really nice to see the Islanders finally having those fans come back, because they had been missing it for the last 4 or 5 years when they played in Barclays Center.
Moving on to the Central Division, with the Carolina Hurricanes and Nashville Predators, the Hurricanes beat the Preds 4-2. And, I think this series was quite surprising. I think a lot of people had the Hurricanes in a sweep, the Hurricanes in 5 games. I don't think people gave Nashville much of a chance to succeed in this series. But look, man, on the back of their crowd, I think the crowd really helped Nashville steal those 2 games at home. Especially the one in overtime with Matt Duchene scoring. But it's weird because the narrative with the story, or with the series, I should say, was, all home teams won the game, except in game 6 when Jacob Slavin, or it could have been tipped by Sebastian Aho when he scored for Carolina. And then Alex Nedeljkovic played amazing. Same with UC Saros. So another great goaltending duel. And I thought Nashville had some power play problems. And I think the game, especially in playoffs, is decided from the man advantage, is decided on special teams, because, if you lose a game because your power play is not working, or your penalty kill isn't doing the best it can be, you could possibly lose the series because of that.
Yeah, exactly. I think this series, was a lot closer than people expected it to be. And, not even just before the series, but after 2 games, Carolina looked like they were, on pace to sweep the series. They won 2 at home, and Nashville just wasn't able to find a lot of scoring. But, I think it's really great for the game. Like you mentioned, every home team won except in game 6. You don't think of Carolina and Nashville as like these huge markets, but they're starting to grow into it, and the game is expanding and getting fans in these smaller markets. It's huge for the league, and for Carolina to be able to come home and play and have an electric crowd, and Nashville to be able to come home and play and have an electric crowd. I think this series was just really nice for all the fans who had been missing for all the fans that had been missing fans in the arena all season long.
Moving on to the last series in the Central Division with the Tampa Bay Lightning and Florida Panthers, the Bolts beat the Panthers 4-2 in 6 games. And this was this was my favorite series to watch ever since from game 1. That really set the precedent for what the series was to come. That was the measuring stick. Okay, so there's going to be lots of skirmishes. There's going to be lots of fights after the whistle. And that's just playoff hockey. Like, I love that style of hockey. And, with the Panthers, though, getting into the news of the series, they didn't really get good goaltending. They had to use Spencer Knight, and that's someone who I didn't think was going to start in the playoffs. You're really going down the goaltending depth chart. They have Bobrovsky, they have Drieger, both who had, terrific seasons. And then you have Spencer Knight, who had, a great season as well. So, when you're going down the list and you have to use 3 separate goalies in a series, you're obviously doing something wrong. But it was just Tampa was, more skilled than they were. Nikita Kucherov proved to be too much. He had 11 points in 6 games. Half of those, or, the majority of them, were on the power play. So he's obviously asserting himself again as another scoring threat, something that we've missed all season long. And then Steven Stamkos coming back, having 8 points in 6 games. He was just as big of a threat. So it's great to see that the Bolts are finally healthy, and that, this is one of their best lineups that we've seen. This is probably one of their best lineups, better than their Stanley Cup winning lineup.
Yeah, no, I think, this Tampa Bay team has a real good shot to go back to back. The way that they were playing in the series, it just looked like that. In that game 1, sure, it was an exciting game and they only won by 1 goal, but, the power play was clicking, and I feel like things were just going well for them. And, even after that game 1, I thought that they were going to win the series, and not only that, but, have the ability to make a deep run, just because, you mentioned special teams, and this Tampa power play, it's a really hard one to stop. It's going to take a really good penalty kill to be able to consistently stop this power play. Teams have to be super disciplined, when playing against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And, it hurts those teams because, to sacrifice being a little bit more disciplined, they're losing a bit of, physicality to their game, a little bit of grit to their game, which is, maybe a way that you can neutralize some of the top players. But it's just such a hard Tampa team to beat. They went all the way last year, and I think they had Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Islanders, but really didn't face too much adversity all playoffs. They kind of just were the better team in each series, and that's why they won. And I think they got the best of the Panthers here, but it was a really good fight from the Panthers, and I'm glad to see the growth in the Battle of Florida, or the Sunshine State Showdown. We haven't really seen much between these two teams in their history, but this year we were gifted a little bit of a treat.
But one thing that I want to say is that Vasilevskiy didn't really impress me at all this season. Or not this season, sorry, this series. Because it felt like Florida was, jamming the crease. They were getting bodies to the front of the net. It seems like Vasilevskiy is one of those goalies where you have to screen him, and so he can't see it, and the puck's by him. Like, he's going to be the next Carey Price. He's going to win all the major awards one day. One year, he's going to win the MVP, the William M. Jennings, all those important goalie awards plus more. And before the shutout in Game 6, it seemed as though Florida was able to crack him. Like, I think he had an above 3 goals against average going into Game 6. So given that, he didn't really surprise me, which is kind of shocking.
Yeah, but to your point about, Florida having to use 3 goalies, Vasilevskiy pretty much just had to stop a couple pucks, and, he was doing better than the goalie on the other end. Like you mentioned, they had to go to Spencer Knight. They had 2 starters, Bobrovsky and Drieger both, this regular season proved that they could be starters for NHL teams. And it's really crazy that they got so desperate that they had to go to the rookie. And, he did play solid when he came into the lineup, though. I think it was a good spark for them. And I think, Florida fans, if they didn't see enough in the regular season, they definitely saw stuff in the postseason, being excited for the goalie of the future.
Getting into the West Division now, the Vegas Golden Knights and Minnesota Wild kicking things off there. The Golden Knights avoid the 3-1 choke once again, or well, I guess not once again, for the first time in 3 of 4 years they've been in the league. The Golden Knights win 4-3 in Game 7. Or, well, the series 4-3 in Game 7. But yeah, it's been 3 straight seasons where the Golden Knights, they've been up 3-1 in the series. So obviously we have San Jose, we have Vancouver, and now we have Minnesota. So it seems as though Vegas is now having trouble, closing out the series despite their deep team. And I label Vegas as Stanley Cup contenders. It seems as though they have, deep defense. They have, great depth that really came to show in Game 7. I mean, look, Matthias Janmark scored a hat trick. I don't know if, someone else, I certainly didn't have Matthias Janmark on my bingo card scoring a hat trick in Game 7. You'd never look to your depth to come up in Game 7, but look where we are now. Vegas again showing off their great depth, and that was a huge trade deadline acquisition from Chicago. So like we've seen with New York, their trade deadline acquisitions are paying off for one another.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, this series was quite an interesting one. Obviously, the 1-0 game in Game 1, the Wild were able to steal that one on the road, and then Vegas winning 3 straight games. I thought at that point in time that it was Vegas's series to lose, whether it be 5 or 6 games. I didn't think, we were going to have to see a Game 7 just because, Vegas had a lot of the momentum. Fleury was playing, incredibly, and, the Wild lost Marcus Johansson, broke something, whether it be a leg or an arm. He broke something, midway through the series. And then, I didn't really pay too much attention to Games 4 or Games 5 or Game 6, but all of a sudden I'm looking at my phone after the games, and, Minnesota comes out on top, and all of a sudden we have a Game 7, and, Vegas was able to figure it out by that Game 7. They won 6-2, I believe, pretty dominant victory. And, that's the team we expect to see from Vegas. Like you mentioned, Matthias Janmark with the hat trick in Game 7, this team is so deep that even when your top guys like Mark Stone, who, wasn't able to get on the score sheet in that Game 7, even when they're not producing, you have your depth pieces, playing a role as well. And it's really crucial for teams that want to make a deep run to have those, players that aren't on their top 2 lines, contributing in many ways.
Finally, closing out the first round recap with Colorado and the St. Louis Blues, Colorado Avalanche. It was a sweep for Colorado. Again, this series, along with the NASCAR series, the Nashville and Carolina series, it seemed as though the fans, the analysts didn't really give much to St. Louis or Nashville. Like I thought Colorado was just going to dominate as well. But getting into the notes of it, like the Blues blue line was banged up and it really couldn't handle the forecheck of the Avalanche. They really kept game one close where they could have stolen one. I thought, if the Blues really wanted to stand a chance, game one was to steal. And I think it was a 4-3 or it was, 5-3 with an empty netter or something, some 2-goal lead with an empty netter. But yeah, during this type of series, Binnington needed to steal a game or two for the Blues to force a game 7 or at least get there in some way. The Blues' best players weren't the best players. And, had David Perron been available for game, or I think he was available for game 5. I'm not sure, he wasn't. But David Perron was the leading goal scorer for the Blues. And he was put on the COVID list. So had he been cleared earlier, this could have been a complete different series. Like it's hard to replicate that goal scoring or that, scorer for your team when he's out on the COVID list.
No, I agree. David Perron was really good for the Blues all season. And, when he was out of the lineup, it just seemed like no one was able to step up in his, absence. Vladimir Tarasenko had, a couple goals here or there. And he was able to, even though he's been battling injuries for the last, year and a half, 2 years, he was able to come in and give us a little bit of that old Tarasenko we're used to seeing. But, this was more of, a traditional sweep where you look at the Edmonton series as, a really close sweep, and Winnipeg was able to, just capitalize on all 4 games. This one, the Blues never really had a chance. The Avalanche were just the better team. And my perspective on this Avalanche team is that, when Philip Grubauer is playing his best hockey, there's not a lot you can do to beat this Colorado team, just because, if you're looking for any disadvantage that the Avalanche have, it's maybe in net, just because Grubauer hasn't been able to prove himself to go on like a deep run. Obviously he hasn't won a Stanley Cup as the starting goalie. He was the backup in Washington. But when he's playing great, this Colorado team is going to be a really tough out, just because, like I mentioned with the Islanders, they have 4 complete lines and 3 complete D pairs. But the difference between the Avalanche and the Islanders is the Avalanche have that star power. They have McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog. They have Makar and Devon Toews, Girard on the blue line. Just a really, really solid team. And, it's crazy to think that only, 4 or 5 years ago, they were the laughing stock of the league. I remember they came last place. They had one of the worst, regular seasons ever. They had this one time where one of their players was on a breakaway, and instead of shooting it on net, he dropped it back to the defenseman on the other team. And that was kind of just like the low light of their entire season. And, you look at this team now and they look like, one of the best teams, we've seen, and, a real threat to win. And I think, this 4-0 sweep was kind of like a nice, break into the playoffs for them. Obviously, I think, one thing that does come out of it, Nazem Kadri, can't control his temper, as we're used to seeing in the playoffs. When he played in Toronto, he got suspended 2 years in a row. And then he kept it clean last year. He had a great playoff for them last year in the bubble. But, he is suspended, and that might have an impact on the series against Vegas in the second round.
That's true. Yeah, I should have mentioned that, but yeah, it's weird that, with Kadri getting traded, you'd think that he was probably traded for discipline reasons, for not being disciplined in the playoffs when it matters most. And, he was a real scoring threat, or one of the very little scoring threats on Toronto when he did play for them. And it's weird to see that he's still back to his old ways again. Like you'd think he'd learn his lesson from, being suspended twice, or don't do those hits anymore. But now he's suspended again. And, I thought I'd bring up that Nate McKinnon is just doing Nate McKinnon things. Like he is completely tearing up. He tore up the Blues. Cale Makar tore up the Blues. It's the Avalanche could be the next modern day dynasty as we look at it.
No, and I really think that, they're real threats to do it. They have a really solid core, and, all their pieces are super young too. Landeskog being a quote unquote veteran on the team, he's not even too old himself, obviously a UFA at the end of the season, but, I think they have the pieces to keep him. And the real, thing that supports the Avalanche being this long-term dynasty is not even their team now, but who they have in the pipeline. Newhook got some action in this series against the Blues, but you got guys like, Bo and Byram in the system as well. Like And the defenseman they drafted last year, I remember first round, Poirier, I believe, Jeremy Poirier. It might be him, might be some other guy, but the Colorado Avalanche, Joe Sakic has just done an incredible job, as GM of this team. And, all the credit should go to him. Maybe not all the credit, but, a lot of it just because he's built this team really well. And, they look scary for any team going up against them.
You're talking about Justin Barron there, to correct you.
Justin Barron.
25th overall in 2020. I agree with you. Like, he is going to be a stud on their blue lines, which makes this is a good move for the GM. Like, it makes one of their already defensemen that has played well. Like, do they trade Girard? Do they trade Taves? Right? Like, their trade prices are really high, which you could get a great return from.
And they're so well built. You look last season what they did. They traded Nikita Zadorov to the Blackhawks just for 1 year out of Brandon Saad. They're not going to be able to have the cap to re-sign him. Brandon Saad's going to hit the open market, but they have that depth where maybe they can trade off one of their pieces for a better player with a similar contract, and just keep going for that cup. I think they're in a win now mode, but it's also win for the next 10 years. I think this Colorado team, it's only a matter of time before they do win a cup. The only question is how many are they going to win?
Moving on to Pags' predictions, the segment that doesn't stop, but with the NHL only having one game on tomorrow on Tuesday, it's the Lightning and Hurricanes, their game 2 of round 2. The Tampa Bay Lightning won game 1 of a score of 2-1, so it was very tight checking. Nedeljkovic had a bad goal let in, which I'm sure he'd like to have back. But I think Carolina is going to take game 2. I think it would be a nice tie going back to Tampa Bay, tie up 1-1.
Yeah, no, it was a really close game 1. Tampa won it 2-1, but they were able to steal that game on the road, and I think that's all they really needed to do in these first 2 games. I think Carolina is going to, come out and be a really exciting team tomorrow night, just because they dropped that first game on the road. And, even though they had a close series, it was 2-2 with Nashville, they were never down in that series any games, and they were never in, any real danger situation. But if they lose tomorrow night, Tampa Bay has 2-game lead heading back to Tampa. It's going to be really tough for them. So I'm expecting, the best Hurricanes team we've seen this season to come out tomorrow night. And I'll take the Hurricanes in that one.
Well, I'd like to thank again Nolan Thode for joining me on another edition of Down to the Wire.
It's always a pleasure, Pags.